name is Rita Kakati-Shah. I'm your host for the Uma Show. Welcome to your one-stop journey for feeling empowered. We're a platform for change. We build confidence. We are your voice. Today, we're exploring movers and shakers in law and finance. And I'm so excited to be joined by a goddess of go-getting, Sumana Setty, who is co-founder of Commit to Change and partner at Kirkland & Ellis in New York. Welcome, Sumana.
Hi, thank you, Rita.
So I want to find out all about you. You're from Michigan originally. You're technically live in New York, but you're currently in Los Angeles as a COVID escapee. Tell us a bit about your background and how you grew up.
Sure. So aside from my experience on the coast, I'm actually a Midwesterner by training. My parents grew up in India and moved to the US, and we lived in Pennsylvania for a while, and then at the ripe age of 16, which I would not recommend to anyone, moved us to Flint, Michigan. And I will tell you, it was one of the most defining moments in my life, not because it's just challenging as a teenager to have that much chaos put into your life, but it was also because it was where I found my identity. So when we were living in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, I was literally the only person of color. There weren't any Black people in my school, no Latino people, no Indian people. It was just me, and no one understood who I was, other than the sort of curry jokes you hear about Indians. It wasn't really a known entity at the time, and it was really challenging to grow up. And quite honestly, I changed my name to Sue. And during this transition to Michigan, it was so fascinating because suddenly I was surrounded by Indians. We had Indian neighbors, we had children in our schools that looked like me, that talked like me, that had experiences like me. And although, my mom's always been religious, it was in Michigan is where I found spirituality. We started going to Bala Vihar classes and learning about the scriptures. And I learned a lot about the roots of my culture, which I think, truthfully, it's identified me to this day.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, and you're so right. I mean, I grew up in a predominantly white neighborhood in the UK too. So it's almost like it was hard to associate because you're the only one that looks like you, at least to start off with, until, you grow up and you have other folks that you meet along the way. So thank you for sharing that. You then went on to study a few years later, obviously, at the London School of Economics before going to law school in Chicago. That's quite a diverse educational path. Tell us what inspired your academic choices.
Sure. So I was an economics major at the University of Michigan, and I was always interested more in the macroeconomics elements of how global economies grow, like how social, political, legal factors impact growth. And I was given the opportunity to study this more in depth at LSE, which is sort of what piqued my interest. And at the time, I focused on how populations impact growth and looking at why certain developing countries like India weren't just growing at the same pace that people were predicting them to grow based on just traditional economic models. And you take a step further into it and you realize, well, how do you expect these economies to grow when half or more than half their population is based of women, and these women aren't educated, they're not working, they're not giving any resources, but they're depleting resources. And so it's really fascinating to see how these socio-cultural elements were actually impeding economic growth. And it didn't really impact me at the time to go become a lawyer, but it did impact my interest in wanting to create Commit to Change and actually give back to girls' education. And I actually work with impoverished orphan girls to make sure we can start stemming some of these tides. But it actually wasn't until I started Commit to Change that I was able to connect all of this into why I became a lawyer. I was talking to my dad, and my dad is one of 8 children. He has 6 sisters. And my grandparents spent so much time and money focused on my dad's education, they really didn't focus on my aunts. And my dad looked through that and he saw how that impacted the family. And although he was able to go to medical school, his sisters didn't have the same choices. And he really wanted to make sure I had those choices. And he made it clear to me that I would be given any opportunity that I wanted to seek. And so that's sort of what empowered me to become a lawyer. And looking back at all of this, when I was having these conversations, I asked my dad, I'm like, you were a tiger, Dad. You were horrible growing up. You were so focused on education. And he just looked at me and he's like, well, education was the best inheritance I knew how to give you. And so I think all of it in hindsight connected, but quite honestly, they were just choices at the time that I was drawn to. And I wasn't able to connect those dots until much later in my life.
Yeah, that's super interesting how you mentioned that, actually, and also the influence that your dad had on your life and sort of seeing the path forward. I guess that's really powerful. What's interesting is that you actually mentioned studying the relationship between women and economic growth in countries, especially during time in London. I remember the McKinsey study when it was first published a couple of years ago now, on women's impact on the economy. And that if women and men were equal from a household perspective, career and educational perspective, then the global GDP could actually, in theory, increase by $28 trillion. Now, that is super remarkable. And I think that's almost what actually ties into the work that you're doing, because it really links into school-age children, right? Because you're now providing one of the hows of doing what, in theory, can happen. So you mentioned Commit to Change. Tell us a bit about your nonprofit.
Sure. So Commit to Change is a nonprofit. We focus on educating impoverished orphan girls, mainly in South Asia. I started in India primarily because that's my home country and I knew it best. And I was given an opportunity to go witness firsthand what was happening to girls in these countries with respect to the children in these orphanages. They were escapees from bonded labor and the brothels, and just simply tossed out on the streets because their parents said, I have a son, I don't need a daughter, or I don't have the money for a daughter. And so these are the girls we work with, and watching them just soak up the idea of knowledge and learning and growth. It's just been this remarkable journey. And what we really focus on is not so much making sure she becomes the next lawyer or doctor or engineer, but that she makes whatever choice for her life and she's empowered to make it. So we really focus on the power of choice. So whether she goes through this journey and wants to go become a housewife, a mother, a garment maker, whatever it is, she's doing it because that's the choice she's made for herself. And when she's empowered to do that, that naturally starts feeding into the growth we're talking about, because she will go give back to her community and her society, and most importantly, her family. She's more likely to educate her girls as much as she is her boys. She'll get married maybe later, she'll have children later. Whatever she does, she's making these choices and she's creating her own destiny, and that's what we really focus on.
Yeah, no, I love that, because that's like the ultimate journey in confidence. You know, the work we do at UMA is all about finding that inner voice, bringing up who are you and being proud of being yourself. Yeah. And that is exactly what we do. So I totally love that mission. I'm going to pivot now a little bit to just your career journey. You were also a general counsel at a private equity firm in New York City. How did you get to from studying law to finance? And also, just for our viewers, what actually does it mean to be a GC?
Sure. So I actually did a degree in both. I have my MBA and JD. So sort of combining these elements in my career just seemed the natural evolution with it. And private equity as an industry is really fascinating for a lawyer because it has so much depth to it. Not only does the law continually change on what you can do within the field, but also you're constantly looking at different companies and assets and really getting enthralled in sort of the details of all of it. So as a lawyer, it's just been an amazing journey. As a general counsel, you're sort of the first line of defense. So you are the, so basically, you're the lawyer for the company. So anything that happens from a corporate perspective, from a litigation perspective, you're sort of the arbiter of all of that. But you're also sort of the gatekeeper of information. You're the one who actually knows what the left hand is doing and the right hand is doing and how to assimilate that information to make sure that the business is making the right choices for itself and managing its risks and creating opportunities and the like. So I feel like you're like the one hand that does it all in the general counsel.
Totally. So it's like, you know, literally you're the master of everything, I guess, you know, having to fit it all in. That's quite amazing. And then now currently you're actually the partner at a law firm called Ellis, but you specialize in private equity. So tell us a bit about that.
Sure, and I think this parlays a little bit into something we've discussed as well. It's sort of, when I was at my private equity fund, I loved it, I loved my team, and I was learning so much, but I started capping out on my growth at the firm. And so given the situation, I decided it was just best to try another venture in my life. And so I went back to private practice at Kirkland & Ellis, and we focus on the same sort of concepts that I was telling you about earlier, but from a different viewpoint. Instead of one client that I focus all my energy on, I have multiple clients. So in a way, it's much more interesting, and because you're able to see so many different facets of the issues that people face, and you're able to just parlay knowledge across the board.
No, that's amazing. I love that. Obviously, being senior women in your profession, talk to us about any barriers you might have felt in your professional life, I guess, getting to the level of seniority that you've reached.
Sure. I mean, it's not to be cliche, but it really is hard to break those glass ceilings. As I just alluded to, one of the reasons I left my private equity firm is I couldn't go above where I was. To give you an example, I was working on a deal that went extremely well. I was heralded by everyone in the firm for just being such a leader in that process and helping to ensure that it got done, and it got done well. But when the time came, everyone on that team was promoted except me. And
wow.
So it was really hard to sort of swallow as to why the male counterparts who weren't as involved were able to move up that ladder, but as the only female person on the team, I wasn't. And so candidly, I should have taken the high road and talked about it and fought for my title, and instead I meeked out and I left. And I would say, in hindsight, I really should have fought a little harder.
Yeah, but I think, there's two ways of looking at it. One way is that, you know what, you're thinking, okay, do I really want to go and fight this battle? Do I want to move on to pastures greener, where I can set my precedents and be who I am and be really kind of admired and promoted for my own credentials there. So you kind of chose to do the latter, I guess. Just inspiring, I think,
Thank you.
How did you kind of, I guess, navigate? I'm guessing you would have had several challenges along the way, and also going into different industry as well. How would you have navigated those challenges?
It's honestly not being afraid to ask questions and just really embracing the challenge, being ready for what life throws at you. And I think although the experiences are different, everything sort of connects in a different way. The challenges I faced when I was in-house were different from the challenges I face now in private practice, but there's still some level of connectivity in terms of how do you analyze those situations, what experiences are you drawing upon, and everything I think in life happens for a reason, and it layers and builds, and I think you don't discount your base of knowledge just because it's a little different.
No, I think that's really, really wise words there. Thank you for sharing that with us. So I guess what's next on the horizon for you? Both professionally and personally. I know you're obviously in LA right now, kind of that West Coast, East Coast sort of shift around, I guess any plans to stay there longer term? What's the...
Oh, no, New York is my home. I'm really excited to go back to my city and help rebuild. I'm feeling a lot of we're New York tough, right? So we come back, we build strong, but professionally, I'd like to figure out a way to sort of meld my world. So I have this very capitalist practice and a very socialist practice with the nonprofit. And I really want to figure out a way to combine those elements, because I love the intellectual curiosity of being a lawyer, but I love and I'm so passionate about the work I do for Commit to Change. And given the way the world is shifting towards social impact and companies that really focus on it and build on it, I think that would be my next career trajectory.
Amazing. I love that. So I guess before we let you go, what words of advice would you leave for any young women out there who might be watching today and wish to kind of follow in your footsteps?
Well, I'm going to follow from the great Justice Ginsburg and tell you that dissents form future age. And so, if you have an opinion and a voice, it might not be heard today, but it doesn't mean it doesn't leave an impression on someone that'll carry that message forward. So use your voice, state your truth, and fight for the things that are meaningful to you, but do it in a way that makes people want to lead you.
I love that. And what a great note to end on. You know, I love that. Thank you so much, Sumana, for sharing your life journey with us. This has been so powerful. Sumana Setty, General Counsel at Kirkland and Ellis in New York. And thank you to our viewers for joining us on this empowerment journey. We want you all to embrace that inner goddess of go-getting inside each of you. Be bold, be you, be Uma.